Hello, we're speaking with Matt Wolf, CFO of Drinks. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
So, Matt, as always, we're going to begin by asking you to take a look back for us. We're wondering, what are those experiences you feel prepared you for this role, the CFO role? What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a mix. My trajectory has been somewhat typical, but it's had a bunch of varied elements from M&A related work to FP&A related work, and so I've had a number of different experiences that I've leveraged in various ways. I started out my career really getting deep into data analytics. So it gives me a certain, I think, perspective on the CFO role and how I look to elevate finance teams, look to organize data, look to modernize reporting in an organization.
And you did that at the Economists Incorporated. Is that a research outfit? Tell us a little bit about it. What was the nature of it?
Sure. Yeah, no, I started out in Washington, D.C. This was a couple of decades ago. But what Economists Incorporated did was largely work for companies that were involved in FTC or DOJ antitrust matters. And a lot of what we were doing was related to helping mergers and acquisitions get through government screens. And so a lot of it was analyzing massive amounts of data on on market power and concentration and all that sort of stuff, but very attached to the sort of M&A transaction flow. And that's kind of what got me interested in finance, really. There's kind of two tracks coming out of that job, which was either kind of going to law school or going to business school. And I obviously did the latter.
Can we ask you about that? I noticed you went to Tuck and had a business school at Dartmouth. What sets Tuck apart as a business school, though? For others out there, the choice you made there, why? What were you looking for?
Yeah, it's a very special place. I think when you make the decision to go spend 2 years effectively in the woods to learn about business and make great connections, it really provides a sense of community, and just the connections that I've made there, I've maintained over the last 2 decades or so. Not quite that long, but getting close. And I think it really focuses you on what you're there to do, as if versus if you were in a business school in a much more or a larger area, let's say. You really are pretty isolated up in New Hampshire. I think it self-selects for that. So it's people that really want to be engaged in the school, in the community. And I loved every minute of it.
So, and again, okay, my takeaway is that, okay, the alumni network, and this is what I've heard elsewhere, is one of the tightest, one of the bonding that goes on there is strong. Yeah.
I think that's right. Okay. Yes. And I've had the benefit of that throughout my career. It's both on the side of where I've reached out to someone for a conversation or for a connection, or a student or a more recent alumni has reached out to me as well. And we're always kind of willing to pick up the phone and talk, which I think is, I think it's true in a lot of business schools, but I think because of the experience that we share being in New Hampshire for 2 years, it really goes a long way into kind of keeping that sense of community as you go along.
And you used the degree, in my way of looking at it, again, you began in research, more or less. You described to us what exactly the Economists was about, and you landed an investment bank. Going into Tuck, was that the outcome you were looking for?
It's a good question. So I had done a lot of work at Economists Incorporated in energy, and that's what I kind of wanted to go in that direction. I wasn't sure that was going to be a corporate role or some other finance role. I started, as a lot of first-year MBA students do, exploring a number of different paths. I met some people, alumni that were at Morgan Stanley, and also at the time at Merrill Lynch, working in the energy field or in energy coverage. And that seemed like a natural extension of what I sort of wanted to do. And I pursued that. So I did my summer at Merrill Lynch in London. I did London because I wanted to get more emerging market exposure. That was sort of the impetus for that. And then coming out of business school, I transitioned over to Morgan Stanley and spent 5 years with Morgan Stanley, both in London, started out covering energy and a bunch of different topics, sort of as happens, sort of got pulled into industrial coverage. You kind of gravitate towards what you've been seeing. Spent 3 years or so in London. Wanted to move back home for personal reasons, so moved to New York. Joined the consumer retail group in New York and started covering consumer goods. One of which was actually beverage alcohol. So this kind of the connection to drinks goes way back if I really think about it.
And what are the next steps? And I know geography doesn't seem to be an issue with you. You do move around a little bit, or do I have that right?
Yeah, so I've lived in a couple of different places. As I said, I started out in Washington, a couple of years in New Hampshire, moved to London, then New York. I spent some time in Mexico City, then moved to San Francisco. Was there in the Bay Area for about 6 years, and then recently moved to Austin, Texas, where I am today.
When you leave Morgan Stanley, is it to be an operator? You want to, you're shooting for the C-suite. You're coming in as an FP&A expert. How are you positioning yourself?
Yeah. So I wanted to take sort of the transactional skills that I had learned, and all of the financial modeling and forecasting and all the things that we do there, and leverage that, just like you said, into an operating role. What I found that I liked the most about my time with Morgan Stanley was when I was working with clients on either buy side or sell side transactions, and sort of how do we tell the story of the business? And that's what I really enjoyed doing. And so that was largely what I was looking to do when I came out, was to move into the C-suite as a CFO and help tell that story for companies. And be more, obviously, very much involved in the operations to kind of give just a lot more context and have a lot more say in how things are working.
And I know that, we know that you land back into the beverage world with drinks, but at the same time, you first leave Morgan Stanley, you're connected to the beverage world still, and some of the ventures you become attached to, but then you move into what I think would be called automotive. Am I right about that? So
that's right. So
yeah,
my career, it's funny. I've sort of, as I look back on it now, this is not intentional, but I've cycled sort of through automotive and beverage alcohol, which is just a kind of a weird mix. But I've always been just interested in cars, just personally. And so when I had the opportunity to work for startups in the automotive industry, it was a personal curiosity and personal interest. And it was an industry that I was familiar with. I read about just as kind of normal course of my life, kind of a car guy, if you will. And so the chance to work with folks who were also aligned in that way and build businesses doing that was very compelling. And so I did that across a couple of companies. What's interesting is that the second of the two, which is Roadster, where I joined in 2017, was really revolutionizing, digital retail in the automotive space. It was a space that had not seen a ton of innovation to date back in the kind of late teens. And we're looking at how we could really create a digital retail sort of process in an industry where it didn't typically exist. And so over about 4 years, we built that company up, ultimately sold it to CDK Global, which was a great transaction, and really kind of showed the power of what we were building when we were acquired by one of the leading companies in the space.
So were you CFO at the time that merger went down?
I was CFO at Roadster at the time of the transaction. That's right.
Yeah. So you made it to the C-suite. Tell us something about arriving there, though. And again, you made a 4-year investment with Roadster and that chapter of your career. You arrived. Did they have a CFO yet, or were you their first CFO? And how'd that work?
They did not. So I was the first. I came in as a VP of finance and was in that role for a year or two. I was the first finance hire, so I really set everything up from kind of the ground up.
Did you raise money for them? And
we did. So we raised a couple of rounds of financing, some debt as well, and then led them through the transaction along with the rest of the exec team, was just phenomenal.
Since you had left Morgan Stanley, were you involved in fundraisers for a number of companies, or was this the first one post Morgan Stanley?
So I'd worked with some other startups to raise funding as well. And so I kind of got used to the conversations.
Yeah.
I enjoyed having them with VC firms. I think it's always interesting to me to see how different firms sort of interpret the story before they begin the conversations. And so I really like having those discussions and really enjoy, again, just getting different perspectives from different investors about how they're looking at the space, where they see value, and then sort of sharing how we view it and looking to find the right match.
You'd mentioned storytelling earlier. Is it different from some of the storytelling back inside the conference room with Morgan Stanley, where maybe you were coaching C-suite executives on, what's the appropriate way to talk about their business? Am I confusing things? Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think what's different about it is because as a bank, you're an advisor, and it's a really interesting thing to be able to do, and I think a very very valuable role where you are able to advise and coach executives on how to present their businesses. I think when you're on the other side of the table, there's obviously the context is just much deeper. So when you're, I don't know, explaining numbers or talking through a process or explaining how your go-to-market works, there's just a lot more context that you have. And oftentimes you set things up yourself or you've hired the people that are doing those roles. I think it's just a much deeper conversation that you can have.
Stepping into drinks, it seems like you're happy being in a more entrepreneurial lane. Is that correct? Or how would you?
I think that's right. I think what I've really enjoyed is stepping into companies where there's work to be done on the finance side. And I say that broadly. It's not kind of the accounting is usually in place and that sort of stuff, but it's really taking the next step, and it's building out goal tracking and KPIs. It's working across the organization. And so what I like to, I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but what I really like to do is elevate the finance team outside of sort of the back office, increase visibility for them so everyone knows who they are. We do see everything in finance, and finance's responsibility is to make sure that everyone else in the company has the resources they need to do their jobs. That's kind of what I view as my key responsibility, and that's whether it's having financial capital, human capital, the right tools, the right systems. We want people to be well positioned to succeed. And so I think by putting finance as an ally and as a support to the organization, I think there can be a perception that it's sort of like the financial police, and it's like, finance doesn't like to spend money. I think finance doesn't like to waste money. Finance likes to invest and make sure we're getting the right returns, and helping managers think through what are we spending on, what are we investing in, and how does this connect to value creation? And that goes back to your original point of organizations this size, roughly kind of call it 100 to 200 people, right around that area. I think there's a lot of hands-on work that can still be done to improve operations, improve efficiency, but the vision is usually there because it's been set up by the founders early on. And I try to find companies where that vision hasn't really changed. What they set out to do is still the strategy, and they're pretty broad visions. But I like coming at this phase. I feel like there's a lot that I can do and a lot of value that I can add.
After the company is sold, or the deal goes down, is it a recruiter? Who opens the door to new opportunities for you? Is it your network? Do the recruiters start calling as the deal happens?
Sure. Of course. It's a mix. It depends. Sometimes it's been network connections where someone's thought, hey, I have this role that you might be great for. Other times, as you're well aware, you get a lot of inbounds from recruiters. And I am pretty selective in what I respond to. And when the opportunity for drinks came about, it sort of bridged a lot of things. I had recently sold Roadster. That was a company, as I mentioned, was revolutionizing digital retail in the automotive space. Automotive is highly regulated, has a lot of laws going back decades. There's just interesting structure in that industry, and it had really lacked for technology in a lot of ways. And the other thing, the executive team at Roadster was just an incredible group of people that I got along with. We're still very good friends. And I saw a lot of the same parallels in drinks, both from the industry side and from the executive team side. And so when I sort of put it all together, drinks was at this inflection point of moving out of the DTC space and into the e-commerce, like really focusing on e-commerce as a software platform, and really driving innovation in industry, which beverage alcohol, where it's, I think, also been a little bit lacking. And so a lot of the pieces just started to fit together. And again, the last piece was the exec team that I work with every day. Just a great group of people, very driven, very smart, and just easy to get along with.
So permit us to ask then about drinks. What is this company about? What are its offerings?
For sure. So what Drinks does is at its core, it enables e-commerce and beverage alcohol. And that's a very broad term. So the way I like to think about it is Drinks allows retailers, any retailer, to be a beverage alcohol retailer or marketer. And so and we do that by providing compliance tools, tax, regulatory, that sort of thing. And basically enabling retailers who are not alcohol retailers to also sell alcohol alongside other products. And so think about, I don't know, any kind of product you bought recently where if you think about it, you're like, oh, it would have been cool to send a bottle of wine with this also. That drinks can enable that. So whether it's, I don't know, the easiest thing is it was recently Valentine's Day, sending flowers. Would it also been cool to send a bottle of wine with the flowers, something like that. So Drinks through its technology platform enables transactions of those kinds in a compliant, safe way. And that at the core is what we do. And there's a couple of other things that we do, I think, very well, is as is sort of popular these days, but we've had it for quite some time. There are AI tools that help merchants identify what kinds of wines sell well to what sorts of audiences. How do you, what do you put in the carousel, sort of thing. And so really not only helping merchants market and market wine to their customers, but also helping them find the right ones. And so it sort of blends a lot of different technologies into a e-commerce enablement platform that, if you look at sort of the overall alcohol industry, e-commerce is a very small portion of that right now relative to other verticals. And I believe that we are at the forefront of driving that adoption and really ahead of the curve on what's going to be a large portion of beverage alcohol e-commerce.
And I know you have a relationship with Shopify. There's an app.
Mm-hmm.
They're a partner, not a customer, correct or no? Is it different?
That's right. So the customers really would be the app users on the Shopify platform. So it could be a beverage retailer, it could be a beverage brand. If they're on Shopify, they can use our platform. But we have a very close relationship with Shopify, and that does certainly help enable a lot of what we're trying to do. They've been a great partner for us.
When you spend your marketing dollars, though, who are you trying to create brand awareness with?
Right. So it actually, this is an interesting question because we've just recently sold our direct to consumer business. That was sort of the genesis of Drinks, where we've developed just, a lot of years of actual retail experience in wine. And so now as we move into the technology side of this, we'll be looking to bring on new merchants, whether they're in the alcohol space or not. Get them on, whether it's Shopify or whether it's someone like a Sam's Club, that we can enable their online e-commerce alcohol sales. So it's really a large group of potential customers. As we like to say, we can make any retailer an alcohol retailer. Again, I use the flower retailer example, where they are able to market on their website wine in addition to flowers. And so you go to the checkout, it all kind of goes into the cart.
Right.
age verification, all the compliance checks that need to be done can be done. And then we are really the conduit between their customer who's ordering the product and a licensed entity that can sell and deliver the product. And so drinks really facilitates that transaction in a way that is really, and I think we talked before this about sort of how we look at the competition in the space. I think what drinks has been able to do is build that at sort of enterprise grade, where we've worked with really large customers. I mentioned Sam's Club is one of our partners, and there are others as well, where we have really focused on the security, the compliance, transaction speed, to be that conduit between an end customer, a merchant, and a licensed entity, which is very specific to the alcohol space, that can import, distribute, ship, sell the actual product.
It triggers a transaction with drinks that again sources the wine and makes sure it gets sent to the same buyer, but not together. Yeah.
No, that's right. It would ship. It would come from the licensed entity. And so how that works is they can appear side by side. They're being sold together, and drinks is really the platform. So drinks isn't selling it. The licensed entity is actually selling it, and this is part of the complicated structure of the beverage alcohol industry. What drinks does is it enables that merchant to show the wine on the website. And then when someone goes to purchase it, it facilitates the transaction and everything from some state compliance of what can ship to what states, age verification, excise taxes, all of the things that need to go into what is a very complicated transaction because of the number of parties involved and the regulatory architecture around it.
Interesting. So yeah, it has to do with how all these jurisdictions have different compliance and rules and
that's right. And they vary by state. They vary by state. And so we want to make sure that the retailers are fully compliant, regardless of where their customers are.
Okay. Now, we know you arrived in the CFO office in the not too distant past, but this finance function that you now oversee, what are your sort of priorities for it? And again, I asked that as my final question, but I'm wondering, as you land here,
Sure.
Are you going to make a hire? Are you going to bring in a controller? What are some of the pieces that you hope to put into place?
Sure. So I have a great team in place that was here when I came in. So that work is actually largely done, which is fantastic. What I mentioned that drinks is sort of at this transition point where we are moving out of the DTC space and moving in to fully focus on the technology side. And I think there are different metrics. There are different ways of presenting financials that are relevant for a DTC business that may not be relevant for a technology business. And so a lot of what I'm doing now is bringing in that expertise and experience of setting up finance functions at various organizations that were on the technology side and putting in new systems, putting in new processes that will allow us to, one, be more efficient, but two, also extract the data that we need to get out to managers and help us make decisions as a technology company.
So what are the numbers you're paying attention to? What are your top of mind metrics?
So obviously, it's there's GMV that we're pushing through the platform. That's a top line metric, and that obviously flows down to sales. Where what I think when you are a consumer business, it's the focus is obviously on acquisition costs, which is still very relevant to us. But now as we move into servicing customers as a technology platform, things like retention and churn and expansion and all of those sort of SaaS metrics become very, very critical. And so that is a large part of my focus is to really bring the organization, bring those metrics into focus for the organization, both in explaining what they mean and why they're important, and then how we're going to track them going forward, so that we can make really educated decisions on things.
Do you expect to raise some additional funding this year?
There's certainly an opportunity, I think.
Matt, we want to ask you for a finance strategic moment, which is a moment of insight that you have experienced somewhere along your finance career path. where there was a moment of insight and you responded to it, whether it was a risk or an opportunity. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
This might be a little bit different than what you've heard before, but one thing I worked for a very experienced CFO several years ago, and the one thing that I remember, if I kind of distill down all of our conversations, it was this idea of don't surprise finance, and I've carried that with me, and I think it manifests in a couple of different ways. One, I think it at its core creates transparency in an organization. It's like, I want to know what the teams are doing and I want to share what we're doing. I want managers to feel comfortable coming to finance and asking for things. I want us to have constructive conversations about things. I don't want people doing things off to the side and then telling me afterwards that they've done something because they were afraid to bring it up or didn't think it was important. Because everything sort of, as I said earlier, sort of passes through finance and is sort of that central nervous system of a company. I think that idea of not being surprised, it helps me understand what's going on in real time with an organization. And then that in turn allows me to plan better. It allows me to understand the business better because I do understand sort of the nuances of how things are operating, which in turn improves business operations. It improves the storytelling because I can really get down into the details of things. And again, I'm fairly new to drinks, but this is sort of something that I carried with me for multiple jobs since I got that really kind of what probably seemed to this person as sort of an inconsequential piece of advice or very obvious advice, but I've sort of let it kind of expand into other areas. And so it all comes down to, let's be transparent, let's be open about things. And that is how I look at interactions with investors. It's how I look at interactions with other executives. It's no one likes to be surprised. There are enough surprises in business. And so to the extent we can minimize them and do so by creating transparency and openness, I think it actually can be a strategic advantage because you don't have to be nearly as reactive as you do if you're in a situation where things are sort of happening out of sight.
CFOs and controllers, does expense management feel like a necessary evil? It's time to switch to Brex. Brex automates and accelerates spend management with easy-to-use corporate cards, travel, expense management, and bill pay, all on one AI-powered platform. Brex makes it easy to boost efficiency and compliance enterprise-wide and free up your managers, employees, and accounting team for higher impact work. Top companies from startups to enterprises are using Brex to automate manual work and transform their finance operations. We're talking DoorDash, Robinhood, Airtable, and countless other industry leaders. Ready to join them? Switch to AI-powered spend management at Brex.com.
We're going to jump to our mentoring round where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and inform future finance leaders. We want you to think back to the first time you stepped into the CFO role. And we're wondering about that first 60 days. You thought, you had observed the role over time. You had Morgan Stanley had sat across the table from CFOs. But as you stepped in, as all the responsibilities finally landed on your shoulders, there was something you wish someone had told you about the role. What would that be?
I think you can understand this, but it's and also keep in mind that my first CFO role was a promotional role from from being in the VP seat, and it was a promotion track. So, but having said that, I think what I wish I had really kind of fully grasped is that there's just a huge need to be adaptable to things because, again, going back to my no surprises sort of strategic approach, there's going to be things that happen anyway. And I think early on, you can be overwhelmed by them because there's so many things happening. It's happening very quickly. You may think something's happening in one way and it happens in a different way. And approaching that with almost more of a curious approach than a frustrated or anxious approach because you have to just remain adaptable. And it's like, okay, well, that's like something that's not what I asked for, or that's not what I thought was happening. But why did it happen a different way? Or this thing is new. I don't understand this. What is this? And so I think approaching challenges with a sense of curiosity and I even say in some cases amusement, like, okay, that's funny. How did this happen? I think it reduces the overall stress of a job that is quite stressful, because it changes the perspective in my opinion, to one of sort of problem solving rather than sort of reacting, because especially at companies of this size, and it can vary, but I think when you have smaller companies that are nimble, that are trying things for the first time, there's going to be new challenges that just pop up. Processes probably aren't fully baked yet. They're changing somewhat often. And so having that approach of, again, curiosity, interest, amusement with challenges that come up, I think will serve the organization much better, because it's one that it is one that allows you to sort of approach things with a calm, clear head. And it also goes back to my earlier statement about not surprising people. It's that if people realize you're going to react with sort of interest and curiosity, as opposed to frustration and getting angry about something, it kind of feeds in itself, where people are like, okay, well, let's get this in front of finance earlier rather than later, because we want to talk about it, because they seem to react really well when we give them information, and they're very helpful in solving problems. So I think that adaptability and approaching things from the perspective of curiosity is really important.
Matt, we'd like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. We're wondering if there's something most people don't know about you.
So what I think people get a sense of this over time of working with me, because of my background, because of years of data analytics and building models myself. I've had this conversation with engineers, with folks in IT, and folks in marketing, where it's like they have said that for a CFO, I am more interested in what they are doing, and I have an appreciation and understanding of what they are adding to the org and how I can help support them. Because it's not just sort of dollars and cents. And I think that comes from just having had the opportunity. And I think one of the reasons I didn't really touch on this before, but just to kind of wrap up an earlier point, why I like organizations at this size, it's that the challenges extend beyond finance. And they may be in people ops, they may be in engineering, they may be in marketing. And I've had the opportunity to work with some really talented leaders in all of those areas of the company. And at times I've led some of those myself. And so I'm very open to having conversations that extend far beyond just the typical finance, accounting, FP&A roles.
Also, on the lighter side, or I should maybe say in a humorous vein, your career, your bio is one of the few we've seen that has garnered success via drinking and driving. Have you heard that before? Or I'm not the first to say that.
I've put that together myself, and it's an odd mix. But it does, I think, as I said earlier, when I look at the two industries and how they have a number of parallels that I don't think are obvious to sort of people who are not in them, with sort of tiered markets where you have retailers and distributors and manufacturers, or retailers and distributors, and the legal structure is anchored at a point in history that's in for the beverage alcohol. It's still back to prohibition in some ways, and then every state has their own view on it. And I think because of that, both industries have had slower adoption for digital retail because it's harder than it is for unregulated products. And so on the surface, yes, the irony is not lost on me. But I think there are a lot of parallels to those two spaces that really make a lot of sense, and I can leverage experience from one into the other.
Very interesting. Yeah. Who would have guessed? We're up to our final question, where we will ask you forthright now. Over the next 12 months, And again, having just stepped into the position, we think you probably do have a long list of items, but we're looking for your priorities over the next 12 months. What would those be?
Sure. I think there's a lot of internal optimization that we can do, whether it's adding systems and processes. That's already underway. I think that's sort of table stakes because it allows us to get numbers faster, get data into the organization. And so that's sort of priority one. And the second would be to then use that information and get more real-time data into the org, both as it relates to kind of what's happening on a regular basis and how we are working towards a plan. I think because we are in this transition point from DTC to enterprise technology, it's even more important that everyone is aware of what our goals are. Everyone's aware of how we're tracking to them and how we're achieving them. And really what that boils down to is where do people fit in the organization? And so it's talking to the organization, talking to an organization that's built up, a decade plus of experience in a very complicated industry, and turning that experience into a product that will really drive e-commerce adoption in the space. And so I think, again, priorities, we need to get faster, we need to get more nimble on data, on numbers, and then get that into the hands of managers so that they, in an understandable way, so that they can make decisions for their parts of the organization. And then I think because we're in this transition point, there's a new drink story to tell. And I think that's also a huge piece of it. And what I'm really looking forward to doing with our exec team.
Matt Wolf, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. We hope 2024 is treating you well. If you haven't already, we hope you'll pay a visit to CFOthoughtleader.com and go ahead and subscribe to our Mentoring Round newsletter, where we highlight the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our recent CFO guests. Also, LinkedIn users, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.